With less than 100 days in this upcoming presidential election, we do have a big change in the results. We saw the Trump lead that's been sustained for months at this point kind of slither down to the smallest degree of a victory margin we've seen him this entire race. And so let's check back to see what really happened. So notice this, my last video about a week ago, you'll notice that Trump was winning the popular vote against Harris 1 versus 1 by about 1 percentage points, more than what we're seeing it today. Right now, the aggregate has Trump at a 47.7% total, whereas Harris is at a 46.5. That's a 1.2% difference. You might say that is actually a victory for Trump, obviously, but it's more narrow than it's been in recent months, which is a little troubling, to be clear. That being said, there's a lot of reasons why this might be the case, be it of course, the liberal surge in fundraising as the floodgates that were previously damming off months worth of Biden donations were finally given to Harris, basically, as well as somewhat of a crypto honeymoon insofar as they have a new candidate now that does not have cognitive difficulties. And so with that being said, there might be a boost that might be what others term it to be a sugar high. By all means, that could totally be the case. But anyhow, right now, this is what it looks like. When you look at how they're covering this election, keep in mind how maybe Donald Trump might be losing some ground with moderates and independents. Right now, Politico has an article saying Trump's first try at pivoting towards Harris blows up in his face. So again, he said something about race where Harris, according to him, when he knew her and was acquaintances with her 20 years ago, she was a district attorney who was Indian American. And then all of a sudden, when it's convenient at the national level, she wants to be a black person. And so he's pointing that out. But as a white guy, it comes off as kind of like bitter, I guess. And I think a lot of people in the middle might see that as disconcerting, even though he's making a valid point. And so what I mean is that he might be actually losing a little bit of ground here once he engages one-on-one with Harris, whereas before he was already winning, plus had the whole gunshot to the ear. And so he had a lot of goodwill that he's now seemingly losing towards the center left, if that makes sense. So the people that were kind of on the fringe, Biden, Trump, 2020 to 24, these people seem to be reverting back to Harris, hence why the margin of victory for Trump is narrowing. As you can see here in the polling, it gets tighter. That being said, we checked with the Real Clear Politics aggregate, but let's consult the 538 aggregate. As you can see here, the national polls have Harris winning the popular vote over Trump by 1.2%. That is troubling, obviously, as if you're losing the popular vote, that takes the win out of the sails of your next administration through rhetoric. Because what the other side can do is the Harris people can say, well, you know what, Trump, you didn't win the majority of the votes, even though that literally does not matter at all. It does in perception, and in politics, what is politics but perception of what you're doing. And so basically here, this is a bad sign for Donald Trump. Granted, this sort of polling has been more favorable to the Democrats insofar as what polling they let into the aggregate. But anyhow, like for example, this Harris +4 poll, Daily Kos. Daily Kos is a partisan sponsor for the Democratic Party. And so that slants the results. And so you're not seeing any Republican-funded polls in this aggregate. And so you can see how it's a slanted amount, but it's still not great. Anyhow, Donald Trump's disapproval, though, we're going to get to in the next slide. As you can see here, Trump is down 8.6. So a net amount of 8.6% of voters dislike Donald Trump. Now, you might say that's pretty bad, but as you can see here, if you look back the last few years, his disapproval has always been in the double digits, okay? It's been, 12, 14, 15, 16, and the negatives. Now it's actually gotten a lot closer to 8.6 negative. So it's actually pretty good. Unfortunately, Kamala Harris, who has been pulling behind Biden up until he quit the race due to obviously the debate performance, Kamala's been actually making up ground. Her disfavorability rate is only 6.6%. That's unfortunate for a couple of different reasons. Kamala is a pariah with most people. She did horrible in the Democratic primaries, but seemingly what you'll notice is that, she averaged about a negative 12% disapproval rating, 15, negative 17. But then all of a sudden, she's getting it closer to like 6.5. And so she's actually more favorable than Donald Trump, arguably, which is too bad because, again, Donald Trump is not a likable person. And what I mean is that he's not like a schmoozer type like Bill Clinton where, as a Republican, you'd be like, oh, this guy's a charmer. If you're a Democrat and you look at Donald Trump, you're like, oh, my God, this guy's like such a menace. But so, I mean, it's a difficult thing to parse through. So the next step in this video, we're going to look at the individual swing states and see how they are affected in this presidential election. We're going to first start off by getting rid of some of the more obvious states for either candidate. First, we're going to start off with Virginia. Virginia voted for Biden by about 10 percentage points 4 years ago. The calculus right now is that Trump is winning the popular vote by anywhere from like 1 to like 1.2. So if you put that into the math, what that basically means is that Trump will do about 6 percentage points better than he did in 2020 as a shift of the vote. What I mean is that Joe Biden won about 4.7% of the popular vote over Donald Trump in 2020. And so if Trump is winning it by 1.2 or 3, over Harris, then that would be a 6-point difference if you really take that into account. So what you would do basically is take the swing states and you add 6 points to the Republican. So again, a D plus 10 result in Virginia would be a D plus 4 in this election. A D plus 7 in Minnesota is a narrow victory for Kamala Harris in the state of Minnesota, where she actually helped out she eventually raised money for the bail for these rioters 4 years ago, in the summer of love, as we love to call it. But now we do have some states that are a little less debatable, like North Carolina, but let's actually look into the polling, as we do have actual numbers for this. As you can see here, Donald Trump currently holds a lead that is pretty solid. It's a 5.5% lead. This is something that was kind of a big piece of the media as of recent weeks, because it was rumored that Roy Cooper could have been the nominee. From what I heard, he's pretty much bowed out from there, thinking that he could probably run for Senate later on, like in 2026. The point being, though, is that obviously Harris is in a position where she's not likely to win, obviously, if you don't have the Democrat governor helping you out in the state. So I think it's pretty obvious that Trump will win North Carolina. In fact, when he lost in 2020, he won North Carolina still by over 1 percentage point, and so that's going to be pretty solid. On the other hand, I think Nebraska's 2nd district would probably go Democrat in the scenario narrowly. But let's move on to Nevada. All right, so the casino hegemon state is still pretty solidified as Republican. As you can see here, Trump is winning on an aggregate of about 4 percentage points, which seems to be in line with reality. Again, Biden won the state by about 2 percentage points in 20. You add 6 to that, and it's 4. And so actually that lines up pretty well with my calculus. And so that's completely fine with me. But moving on to the state of Arizona, which is another state that I think Kamala does horrible in, just like as a candidate. And demography-wise, Arizona is not really favorable to a person like Kamala. But even past that, she could buoy the support if she picks Mark Kelly, the senator out of my state. But maybe that's not going to happen. So we'll see how that affects the race. For now, Trump is winning Arizona by about the same as he was winning Nevada. So that's a 4.2% victory, which makes sense. And so let's put that back into the Republican column like it was in 16. Now we have Georgia. Georgia, on the other hand, also I think is one of the more red states that went to Biden in 2020 closely, okay? Georgia is going for Trump by 3.6 percentage points. Most polls have him up, obviously, over Harris. He does not have a 50% lead yet, which is what you want to kind of cement the whole result. But the point being is that it's seemingly pretty strong for Donald Trump, to be honest, and it's probably going to vote to the right of the country at this point. So there you go. Now, New Hampshire is a state that will probably go blue. Reason being is that it went over 7 points for Biden, and so again, if you add 6 to New Hampshire, that is only a 1-point victory for Kamala, so it's getting a little scandalous, but not enough for Trump to really put a ton of money in there. Now we get into the actual money content right here. The big pivotal 3 Rust Belt key states. People call this the blue wall. So let's start off with the biggest state first. It's going to be Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a state that has a big governor in, well, not big, he's not tall, but maybe at a 5'7", which is a respectable height, okay, guys? But listen, Josh Shapiro is a guy who's very popular, and he's a Democrat out of Pennsylvania. If he gets picked as the nominee for vice president, this could definitely help Harris by a point or two. But as of right now, Trump is leading Pennsylvania by 2.7 percentage points. And so that's odd for a couple of different reasons, because you might see this as a really big victory over the 2020 margin, where if you notice, Biden won this by 1.2. So that's a reversion by about 4 percentage points, which is pretty impressive. So anyhow, let's get right into fulfilling this map. So we have Pennsylvania solidified as a Republican state, unless maybe if Kamala picks a VP, in which case we don't know yet, and so we're going to leave that blank. But the next state we're going to do is Michigan. Now, Michigan is interesting because, again, you have dueling factors. You have a guy in Pennsylvania that might help you out, but he's Jewish, and Dearborn, Michigan has Democrats that are Arab Muslims that are sympathetic to Gaza. So multiple different factors. Now, Michigan is all over the place. Michigan has Harris beating Trump by 2. Now, to be clear, let's just read these out verbatim, okay? You have a PPP poll that has Trump up by 2, which is reasonable. Trump up by 1 by The Hill, Emerson. Fox News has it as a tie, which I mean, I guess. And then all of a sudden Bloomberg has Harris winning by 11, which is, it's like, whoa, what the hell? It's just doesn't make sense here. It doesn't make sense at all. It doesn't make sense. So, I mean, I cannot add this. Now, a lot of people would say, if you're basing this off of the 2024 latest polls, then you should just add this as like a Harris +2. But I cannot do this in my conscience because it's not right. There's no way Harris wins this by 11. I mean, there's literally no way. I mean, by that logic, she'd win the popular vote by like 10, and that's not going to freaking happen, okay? So it's going for Trump too. Executive decision, I know. Wisconsin is last, and Wisconsin is a very tricky sort of projection to make because it's certainly all over the place insofar as like, is it blue, is it red? You can say definitely it's purple, but as of right now, Trump has the narrowest of leads in the aggregate, with Trump winning by 0.2 over Harris, which is actually breathtakingly narrow. So well within the margin of error here. So that's a Trump victory. Now let's expand upon this. Okay, you might say, Lalo, okay, so why'd you get rid of the Harris +11 in Michigan? Well, the same pollster, Bloomberg Morning Consult, had Harris winning Wisconsin by 2. So how the hell is she going to do 9% better in Michigan than in Wisconsin? If she did maybe a point better, maybe 2, okay, fine. But those 3 states are within a couple points of each other in every election that I care about. And so that's my executive decision. I think is pretty good and pretty prudent. So right now we have 312 electoral votes for Trump and J.D. Vance. Kamala Harris and God knows who is going to be the VP. Maybe it's going to be Mayo Pete. That's going to be 226 electoral votes for that ticket. And basically it's a victory like 2016, just that Trump narrowly wins the popular vote, which he didn't do in 2016, but he also flips Nevada. So it's basically like the 2004 election for Bush, in a lot of the same ways where, the incumbent wins or kind of, and wins by more, but not by a lot more than before. It all rhymes, all the more. So furthermore, I'm going to ask you to leave a comment if you had any suggestions or any constructive criticism or any unconstructive criticism. Just throw it my way and I'll read all of it and I'll reply to most of it. Like the video if you like the video. That's the biggest thing that helps me with my channel. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see y'all on the next one. Adios.